Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human research and written material.
It's great to be here. We have a really intense text to get into today.
We really do. I want you to imagine, just for a second, a hollowed-out statue of a bull, and it's forged entirely out of bronze.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and you're locked inside it. A fire is lit underneath its belly, and as that bronze slowly heats up, basically transforming the statue into a giant oven, the internal acoustics are specifically designed so that your screams sound like the bellowing of an angry beast to the outside world.
It's just horrifying, truly.
Right. It was called the brazen bull of Phalaris. It was a very real, very horrific torture device used in ancient Sicily. And yet, one of the most prominent philosophers of the ancient world claimed that a truly wise person could be roasting alive inside that bull and confidently state, you know, this is pleasant and it concerns me not at all.
Which just sounds like complete madness to a modern ear.
Exactly. But that's exactly what we're cracking open today. We're looking at a text that makes some of the most radical, just deeply confrontational claims about human endurance, happiness, and suffering that have ever been put to paper.
Yeah, we're diving into Volume 2, specifically chapters 66 through 74 of Seneca's Moral Letters to Lucilius.
Right. And this isn't just, abstract theorizing from some ivory tower.
Not at all. I mean, Seneca was writing this while navigating the treacherous, blood-soaked politics of Nero's Rome. So he's writing about surviving unimaginable pain, the modern trap of, performative busyness, the illusion that a vacation is going to fix your burnout, and the profound grief of losing someone you love.
So it's heavily applicable to us today, but to start, the brazen bull is probably the perfect place to hit the brakes.
Yeah, we have to start there. Because when we hear someone say that burning alive could be pleasant, or even just a matter of indifference, our modern psychological instinct is to classify that person as deeply unwell. Right?
Oh, totally. We assume they're either a masochist or just completely detached from reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Seneca isn't advocating for delusion here. He's actually introducing a completely different operating system for the human mind.
Okay, let's unpack this operating system.
Well, to understand how anyone could possibly stare down a brazen bull, or, in our world, a terminal cancer diagnosis or the total collapse of their career and remain fundamentally unbroken, we have to look at the bedrock of his entire philosophy. We have to define what Seneca actually considers good.
Right, which brings us to this reunion he writes about in letter 66. He runs into his old schoolmate, this guy named Clarinus.
Yeah, they haven't seen each other in years.
Right. And there's this very universal, very human moment where Seneca is essentially shocked by how old and frail his friend looks. I mean, Clarinus is wrestling with a failing, feeble body. He's physically decaying.
It's something we all experience when we see someone after a long time.
Yeah, but as they talk, Seneca has this profound realization. He observes that an absolutely vibrant, unshakable mind is operating inside this crumbling physical vessel.
Yes. He notes that nature sometimes puts a rare, brilliant soul into a poor physical house, just to prove a point to us, really.
The point being that the house is irrelevant to the quality of the resident.
Exactly. And this is where Seneca establishes the radical premise that dictates literally everything else he writes. He says that virtue, which for the Stoics means moral excellence, reason, courage, justice, virtue is the only true good.
The only true good.
The only one. Everything else is what the Stoics called a preferred indifferent.
A preferred indifferent. Okay.
Yeah. Your bank account, your physical health, your reputation, your youth, whether you're shivering in the cold or sitting by a warm fire, all of these things are completely indifferent to your ultimate goodness and your ultimate freedom.
See, I have to push back on that immediately. On behalf of the listener, the phrase preferred indifferent feels like a massive contradiction.
How so?
Well, if it's indifferent, why do you prefer it? And let's be honest about Seneca himself here. This was a man of immense wealth.
Oh, he was astronomically wealthy.
Right. He owned massive estates. He had unparalleled political influence. It feels a bit rich, literally, for a billionaire to turn around and tell the masses, hey, wealth and health don't actually matter. They're just indifferent.
It's a very fair critique.
I mean, how do we reconcile this? Are we supposed to pretend the physical world, the reality of living in a capitalist society just doesn't exist?
No, and that tension is exactly why the Stoics added the word preferred.
Right.
Because, they weren't cynics. They didn't believe you had to live in a barrel on the street to be pure.
Right.
They acknowledged that all things being equal, it is subjectively better to have money than to be starving. It's better to have a healthy body than to be chronically ill.
Okay, so then what's the catch?
The distinction lies in where you anchor your identity and your happiness. Think of life like a complex strategy video game.
Okay, I'm with you.
The preferred indifferents, the wealth, the health, the status, they're like power-ups or better equipment in the game. You prefer to have them because they make navigating the terrain way easier.
Sure, playing with full armor is better than playing with no armor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the game itself, the measure of whether you are actually a skilled player, is entirely about your internal strategy. It's about your virtue.
Oh, I see.
So if you strip a master player of all their power-ups, they're still a master player. Their skill remains completely untouched.
That's a great analogy. So Seneca is warning us that if you tie your core identity to the power-ups, you become a hostage to chance.
Precisely. If your happiness requires the stock market to stay up, or your body to stay perfectly youthful, you are living in a constant state of low-grade terror. Because fortune can take those things away at any second.
Fortune can just reach in and delete your power-ups.
Right. So virtue is the only thing you actually own. It's the only thing that can't be confiscated.
He uses this mathematical analogy to explain this in letter 71 that I think just clarifies the mechanics of it perfectly. He compares virtue to a carpenter's straight edge.
Oh, yes. The straight line analogy. It's foundational to Stoic geometry, really. In ancient masonry, a plumb line, or a straight edge, was the absolute arbiter of truth.
A line is either straight or it is not.
Exactly. There's no in between.
You cannot make a straight line straighter by, painting it gold.
No, you can't.
And it doesn't become less straight if you draw it in the mud. The straightness is a structural, absolute property.
And Seneca applies this directly to human character. He argues that your virtue doesn't grow or shrink depending on the circumstances surrounding it.
Right. Your moral integrity isn't somehow more virtuous because you're sitting in a boardroom making millions.
And it isn't less virtuous because you're lying in a hospital bed hooked up to a monitor. The straight line is absolute.
The mechanism here is about completeness, right?
Yes.
I guess.
Seneca argues that if virtue could be increased by adding wealth to it, then virtue itself would be inherently imperfect. It would have a void that external things needed to fill.
Oh, wow. That's a really sharp way to look at it.
It is. True virtue is complete in itself. So if you perform an act of immense courage while wearing rags, the courage is 100% complete. If you perform the exact same act wearing a tailored suit, the courage is still exactly 100%. The suit added absolutely nothing to the moral weight of the action.
Which takes us straight back into the fire. Literally.
Back to the brazen bull.
Right, because if virtue is this unbreakable straight line that applies equally in wealth and poverty, we have to look at how it applies in extreme pain. And Seneca claims in letters 66 and 67 that experiencing joy with self-control and enduring torture with bravery are equal goods.
Yep, he goes there.
He literally says sitting at a beautiful banquet feeling profound joy and lying on a torture rack enduring physical agony contain the exact same amount of good.
Which, again, he fully anticipates the revulsion his readers will feel at this claim. It sounds like madness. So to prove his point, he leans into these historical examples of supreme suffering.
Like the brazen bull.
I like the brazen bull.
Right.
But he also brings up Misha Scaevola.
Okay, the Scaevola story is just wild.
It really is.
For context for the listener, Rome is being besieged by an Etruscan king named Porcina. Scaevola is this young Roman who infiltrates the enemy camp to assassinate the king, but he messes up and accidentally kills the king's secretary instead.
A pretty massive mistake.
Yeah. So he's captured and brought before Porcina, who threatens to burn him alive if he doesn't give up Roman secrets.
And Scaevola's response is just legendary.
He doesn't even say a word. He just walks over to an open fire burning on an altar, thrusts his own right hand into the flames, and stands there, completely impassive, while his flesh physically burns away.
Which is just, it's almost unfathomable.
Porcina is so utterly terrified by this display of just sheer psychological dominance that he immediately releases Scaevola and sues for peace with Rome.
It's a story of ultimate psychological leverage. But, modern listeners hear that and think, okay, but burning your hand off is objectively bad. Being on a torture rack is bad. How can Seneca possibly call these things goods equal to a banquet?
Exactly. How does that math work?
Well, we have to separate the circumstance from the response. Seneca explicitly clarifies this in letter 67. He writes, "I'm not so mad as to crave illness."
Okay, so he's not a masochist.
Not at all. He prefers peace. He prefers health. He fully acknowledges that pain goes against our biological nature.
So he isn't saying the torture rack is good. The rack is a circumstance, and circumstances are indifferent.
Exactly. The circumstance itself is not the good. The virtue required to conduct yourself honorably within that circumstance is the good.
The straight line of your character under extreme pressure.
Right, that is the good.
Let's put this in modern structural terms for a second. Think of the engineering foundation of a massive skyscraper in a place like Tokyo.
Okay.
You do not want a 9.0 magnitude earthquake to hit. No one is sitting around praying for a seismic disaster. But if a massive earthquake does strike, you deeply, desperately desire the structural integrity of that building's engineering.
Yes, you want those shock absorbers working perfectly.
You want the flex, the deep concrete pillars. The earthquake itself is a terrifying circumstance, but the engineering that allows the building to sway violently without collapsing that engineering is a tremendous good.
That's a brilliant translation.
And here's the key. That engineering is just as good on a sunny, perfectly calm Tuesday as it is during the earthquake. Its value doesn't change, but it is during the earthquake that its true nature is tested and revealed.
Seneca is seeing the exact same thing about human character. The bravery, the endurance, the steadfastness you display when the ground is shaking beneath you, that is the supreme good.
Right.
He writes that a good man will entrust himself as readily to an honorable deed fraught with hardship as to a pleasant one. The value lies entirely in the honor of the act, not the comfort of the environment.
The psychological shift here is just massive for anyone going through a modern crisis.
Well, completely.
When the bottom falls out of your life, a terrifying medical diagnosis, a betrayal by a spouse, a sudden job loss, our biological instinct is sheer panic. The brain just screams, how do I escape this? How do I make the pain stop?
We just try to scramble out of the situation by any means necessary.
But Seneca forces a complete reorientation. Instead of asking how to escape, you ask, how do I conduct myself honorably within this? How do I keep the line of my character straight while the building sways?
It fundamentally alters your relationship with adversity. You are no longer a passive victim waiting for circumstances to dictate your internal state. You recognize that even in the darkest, most oppressive moments, your agency remains entirely intact.
Because the space required for you to be brave, to be dignified, to act with integrity, it hasn't been reduced by a single millimeter.
Exactly.
I want to pivot from these extreme life or death scenarios to the slow, grinding reality of daily life. Because, we might not face a literal torture rack, but we absolutely face burnout.
We face a lot of burnout.
We face exhaustion, the crushing weight of our routines, and this constant buzzing desire to just escape it all.
Yes.
And Seneca addresses this head-on in letters 68, 69, and 72. His psychological read on human escapism is so accurate, it literally feels like it was written yesterday.
It really does. Let's look at what we can call the geographical cure in letter 69.
The geographical cure, I love that.
Seneca observes his friend Lucilius frequently moving around, changing locations to try and find some sort of peace. And he warns him that scurrying from place to place is a symptom of an unsteady spirit.
We do this constantly today. We think a change of scenery will result in a change of self. You hit a wall at work, your relationship feels stagnant, you feel this ambient anxiety, and your immediate thought is, I need to get out of here.
If I just take 2 weeks in Bali.
Right. If I just move to Austin or Denver, if I just become a digital nomad, everything will fall into place. We pack our bags, we get on a plane, and we arrive in paradise.
And for about 3 days, the dopamine of the new environment tricks us into thinking we are cured.
Exactly. And then what happens?
The baseline returns. The psychological mechanism here is well documented today. The external environment changes, but your internal operating system remains identical.
Right.
Seneca tells Lucilius that if you travel to escape your problems, you are quite literally packing your demons in your luggage. You bring your unresolved neuroses, your insecurities, your restless cravings right along with you.
Wherever you go, there you are.
Precisely. He points out that the spirit cannot grow into unity unless it stops running. You have to physically stop the runaway flight of the body in order to confront the runaway flight of the mind.
And he has zero patience for people who make a big show of their withdrawal from society.
Oh, he hates it.
In letter 68, he dissects what we could call performative retirement. He talks about men who leave Rome for their country estates in places like Tarentum or Naples, which were essentially the ancient equivalents of like the Hamptons or Aspen.
The elite getaways.
Right. But they don't just leave, they make sure everyone knows they are leaving.
He mocks them so brilliantly for this. He notes how people gossip. So-and-so has gone into his retreat at Tarentum. Seneca points out the utter irony of this. You claim you are withdrawing from the world to find quiet solitude, but you do it so loudly and visibly that you just invite the world to watch you be quiet.
It defeats the whole purpose.
Completely.
Yeah.
You aren't seeking a cure for your soul. You're seeking an audience for your supposed enlightenment.
It is the exact psychological blueprint of the modern performative digital detox.
100%.
We all know someone who posts a massive dramatic announcement on Instagram or LinkedIn. I am taking a much-needed break from all social media to focus on my mental health, going off the grid.
With a perfectly curated photo attached, of course.
Naturally. But they are shouting to the crowd that they are leaving the crowd. They're leveraging their withdrawal for social capital.
Seneca would say to advertise your retirement is just to collect a crowd. When you withdraw, your business is to talk with yourself, not to engineer a situation where men talk about you.
So what's his alternative? How are we supposed to do it?
He offers a deeply practical framework for how we should actually use our downtime. He calls it the hospital of the soul.
The hospital of the soul.
Yeah. He uses a physical analogy. If you had a swollen, inflamed foot or a deep laceration on your arm, you wouldn't go to a party and brag about it. You wouldn't wave it around for attention.
No, you'd hide it and try to fix it.
Right. You would quietly lie in one place, rest, and apply medicines to the diseased area until it healed.
But when it comes to the diseases of our minds, our chronic anxiety, our greed, our desperate need for external validation, we do the exact opposite.
We really do.
We either completely ignore the festering wound and distract ourselves, or we wear our stress as a badge of honor. We brag about how burnt out we are to show how important we are.
I only slept 4 hours last night. I'm so busy.
Exactly. It's a sickness.
Seneca forces a deeply uncomfortable reflection here for you as the listener. What are you actually doing with your leisure time? When the laptop closes on Friday night, what happens next?
Are you treating that time as a hospital?
Right. Are you doing the quiet, unglamorous, often painful work of examining your own internal sores? Or are you just seeking a new form of distraction? Are you numbing the underlying anxiety with endless scrolling, binge watching, or just a different flavor of busyness?
That concept of busyness leads us right into letter 72, which contains an analogy that hit me harder than almost anything else in this text.
The dog and the meat.
Yes. Seneca quotes another philosopher, Attalus, who compares our modern relationship with time and achievement to a dog snapping at bits of meat.
It is a devastatingly accurate metaphor for modern hustle culture.
Walk us through it.
So Attalus says, imagine a dog standing near its master's dinner table. The master tosses a piece of meat. The dog leaps, snaps the meat out of the air, and bolts it down whole without even chewing or tasting it.
Just swallows it instantly.
Instantly. And immediately, the dog is back at attention, frantic, jaws wide open, completely fixated on the master's hand, waiting for the next piece to be thrown.
I read that and immediately thought of my email inbox.
Oh, absolutely.
I thought of how we treat our task lists. We complete a massive project, we get a promotion, we close a deal, the piece of meat is thrown, and we swallow it whole.
We don't taste it at all.
We don't savor the accomplishment. We don't actually experience the joy of the present moment. We immediately reset to a state of frantic anticipation, jaws wide open, waiting for the next task, the next milestone, the next hit of dopamine.
We devour the present moment solely to get to the future, which just becomes another present moment we will devour without tasting.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Well, the neurobiology of this is fascinating. We are essentially trapping ourselves on a dopamine treadmill. The dopamine is released in the anticipation of the reward, not the enjoyment of the reward itself.
Wait, really? The anticipation is what gives the chemical hit?
Yes. So we are neurologically wired to remain in that frantic, jaws open state. The danger, as Seneca points out, is how this fundamentally corrupts our own moral and intellectual development.
Because we tell ourselves a very specific lie to justify this behavior. We tell ourselves we are just waiting for a period of leisure.
Just let me get through this week.
Right. We say, as soon as I get through this quarter, as soon as this product launch is over, as soon as the kids are out of the house, then I will have an empty schedule. Then I will focus on my mental health, read philosophy, and get my life in order.
We constantly adjourn our own cases. We act as if the chaotic affairs of our lives are going to eventually untangle themselves and formally invite us to take a break.
But they don't.
No. Seneca shatters this illusion. He warns that affairs do not untangle themselves. We sow them, and several spring up from one. It's like a hydra. You cut off one head, two more grow back.
So what's the solution?
He argues that you cannot postpone wisdom until you have leisure. The wise man integrates philosophy now, cutting straight through the affairs. He writes, "There is no time that is unsuitable for helpful studies."
You have to claim the time right now in the middle of the chaos.
If you wait for the perfect, uninterrupted moment to work on your character, you will reach the end of your life having never actually started living. The dog will die having never actually tasted the meat.
That requires a radical reprioritization. It means recognizing that the chaotic environment you are in right now is the exact training ground for your virtue.
Exactly. You don't wait for peace to practice patience. You practice patience in the middle of a screaming argument or a terrible traffic jam.
Wow. Okay, we've looked at the extremes of torture, we've looked at the daily grind of burnout, but now we have to face the ultimate test of the Stoic operating system.
The big one.
Yeah. We have to look at how Seneca approaches the loss of life itself and the devastating loss of the people we love. We are diving into Letter 70, titled On the Proper Time to Slip the Cable, and Letter 74 on Enduring Grief.
We need to tread very carefully here and exercise significant historical discernment. Letter 70 deals explicitly and graphically with suicide. For a modern listener, the way Seneca speaks about ending one's own life can be deeply jarring and, if misunderstood, entirely dangerous. We have to contextualize the Roman world and specifically the political terror of Nero's reign.
To understand the stakes, you really have to understand that under Nero, your life, your property, and your body were not your own.
Not at all.
Nero was a tyrant who could, on a whim, order the execution of entire families, demand the torture of senators, and subject citizens to horrific public humiliations. In this environment, you were entirely at the mercy of an unstable autocrat.
So in that specific political and cultural matrix, the Stoics viewed suicide not as an act of despair or mental illness, but as the ultimate unassailable reclamation of human freedom.
It was the final move on the board.
Yes. It proved your will belonged to you and not to the emperor. Seneca is writing to men who lived with the daily reality that a knock on the door could mean forced execution or torture.
And to illustrate this ultimate autonomy, he tells stories of men at the absolute bottom of the Roman social hierarchy. Gladiators.
The lowest of the low. Slaves forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of a mob.
Seneca shares the story of a German gladiator who was scheduled to fight in the arena. While being guarded, he asked to use the latrine. He was left alone for a brief moment. Now, in a Roman latrine, there was a tool called a xylospongium.
It's essentially a sponge attached to a stick used for wiping and, the vilest sanitary purposes.
Right. This gladiator took that sponge stick and shoved it entirely down his own throat, choking himself to death.
It is an incredibly brutal, grotesque image.
It really is.
And Seneca uses another one. A gladiator being transported in a cart to the arena who pretends to nod off, manages to lodge his head in the spokes of the heavy wooden wheel, and deliberately keeps his body in position as the cart moves forward until his neck is snapped.
A modern reader recoils at these stories. I mean, why on earth is Seneca holding up these horrific acts of self-harm as examples of virtue?
Because of what the acts represent in a world of absolute slavery. Seneca is arguing that if a man is so fiercely committed to his own autonomy that he can weaponize a toilet brush or a wooden wheel to escape degradation, then humanity is fundamentally free.
The underlying philosophical mechanism here is about the fear of death, isn't it?
Yes. Seneca believes that the fear of death is the root of all human slavery. If you are terrified of dying, a tyrant can force you to do anything.
You can be compromised.
Exactly. You can be forced to act dishonorably. You can be made a puppet. But if you conquer the fear of death, if you view death as a door that is always unlocked, no one can ever truly trap you.
He writes, "It is folly to die through fear of dying." But the enduring wisdom for us today isn't about promoting self-harm. Not at all.
No, of course not.
It is a profound argument for quality over quantity. He writes, "Mere living is not a good, but living well. Accordingly, the wise man will live as long as he ought, not as long as he can."
It is a complete rejection of our modern biological instinct, which is preservation at all costs, regardless of the degradation involved. Right. Seneca wants us to critically evaluate the quality of our existence. Clinging desperately to a long, drawn-out life at the expense of your honor, your rational mind, or your moral integrity is, to the Stoic, a profound failure. A long life is not inherently a better one.
But Seneca doesn't just ask us to confront our own mortality. He asks us to face something arguably much harder, surviving the mortality of the people we love.
Yes, letter 74.
In letter 74, he addresses enduring grief. When you lose a child, a spouse, a deeply loved friend, the physical and emotional void is agonizing. It feels like a massive piece of your own life has been ripped out.
The physical absence is undeniable, and Seneca acknowledges the taking off of their bodies. But he makes a fascinating philosophical claim to combat the despair of grief. He argues that virtue suffers no empty space.
How does that actually work in practice? Because grief feels like nothing but empty space.
He is asking us to separate the physical presence of the person from the honorable impact they had on our souls. The love you shared, the lessons they taught you, the moments of deep connection and shared goodness, those things were expressions of virtue.
And that virtue remains.
Exactly. He writes, virtue takes possession of the whole soul and removes all sense of loss. The physical body decays, but the moral reality of their life and how it shaped yours is uncorrupted by death.
And this leads to what I think is the most beautiful, poignant analogy in the entire volume.
The shrinking circle.
Yes. To explain how a tragic, short life can be just as complete and perfect as a long life, he uses the shrinking circle analogy.
It is a masterclass in shifting perspective. Seneca asks us to imagine a large circle drawn on a wall, and right next to it, a very small circle.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They differ greatly in their area. They differ in the sheer amount of space they take up, but they have the exact same shape. The small circle is just as perfectly round mathematically as the massive circle.
A long life and a short life, if both are lived honorably, have the exact same shape of virtue.
Right. The size of the circle doesn't change its perfect roundness. You can scale down an honorable life as much as you want, from 100 years down to 20 years, down to a single day, and it is equally honorable. The moral weight is identical.
The application of this for anyone navigating grief, especially the deeply unnatural grief of losing someone young, is immense.
It really is.
When someone dies prematurely, our instinct is to mourn the lost time. We mourn the volume of the circle. We cry for the years they didn't get to live, the milestones they missed.
But Seneca is urging us to look away from the volume and look at the shape. Was it a good circle? Was their life, however brief, filled with love, honor, and goodness?
If so, the circle was complete.
It wasn't lacking in virtue just because it was lacking in years.
Yeah.
You aren't mourning an incomplete, broken shape. You're honoring a perfect, albeit smaller, circle.
It allows you to transition from despair over what was lost to profound gratitude for what was actually realized. The geometric perfection of their life cannot be stolen by death.
Beautifully said.
Having confronted these incredibly heavy existential realities, the torture rack, the trap of time, suicide, and profound grief, the text takes a surprising turn.
It does lighten up a bit.
We move into a space that feels much lighter, much more connected. In Letter 73, Seneca addresses a common misconception about Stoics and philosophers in general, which is that they are detached, grim, antisocial rebels.
Right. He focuses heavily on civic gratitude here. He pushes back against the idea that pursuing internal virtue makes you hostile to the external world. In fact, he argues that the philosopher owes a massive debt of gratitude to the rulers, the magistrates, and the state architecture that provides the peace allowing him to study in the first place.
He writes that the philosopher cherishes those who have made it possible for him to do this in security. This challenges the modern, hyper-individualistic view of self-improvement.
It does. We tend to think of our personal growth as a solo project. But Seneca acknowledges the grid. He acknowledges the roads, the laws, the relative safety that forms the container for our philosophical work.
He introduces a concept here about the nature of universal goods that resonates deeply with Eastern wisdom traditions like Buddhism or even early Christian theology that was developing concurrently.
Yes, he points out that peace and liberty aren't like physical commodities. If we have a loaf of bread and I take half, you only get half, it's a zero-sum game.
But peace isn't divided up like rations of grain.
Exactly. When the state is peaceful, peace belongs in its entirety to everyone. I enjoy the whole piece, and you enjoy the whole piece simultaneously.
It's a beautiful recognition of our shared reality. He writes, I owe a great debt to the sun and to the moon, and yet they do not rise for me alone.
And he goes even further into this connected view of humanity by noting that divine seeds are scattered throughout our mortal bodies.
The logos spermaticos?
Yes. This is the Stoic belief that a spark of the divine reason, a fragment of the universal intelligence, exists within every single human being. It doesn't matter if you are an emperor or a gladiator with a sponge stick. You contain the divine seed.
So what's our job?
Seneca argues that your only real job in life is to be a good farmer. You must cultivate that seed through reason and virtue, rather than letting it die in the swamp of your own vices and unchecked impulses.
And the most practical, actionable way we can act as good farmers today, the way we cultivate that seed, is found in letter 74. It might be the single most relatable piece of advice in the entire volume.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Seneca tells us to stop pre-suffering.
The absolute danger of anticipatory anxiety.
He diagnoses the modern human condition perfectly. He warns against anticipating trouble that hasn't arrived yet. He writes that folly is tortured by the future.
Such a great phrase.
And he uses a very physical, biological metaphor to explain what our minds do. He points out that sometimes right before a fever actually hits your body, you get the chills.
Yeah, you start shivering.
You start shivering, your muscles ache, even though your core temperature hasn't spiked yet. The exact same way the mind totters and shakes before trouble actually arrives.
We can map this directly onto modern evolutionary biology and neurochemistry.
Really? How so?
Well, the human brain's ability to project into the future, to imagine scenarios that haven't happened, is our greatest evolutionary advantage. It allowed us to plan for winter and avoid predators.
Makes sense.
But it is also our greatest psychological vulnerability. Because the brain's fear center, the amygdala, struggles to differentiate between a physical threat in the present moment and an imagined threat in the future.
So when we sit at our desks, physically perfectly safe in a climate-controlled room, and we start sweating about a massive presentation we have to give in 3 weeks.
Our brain is pumping cortisol into our system as if a lion is currently in the room.
Wow. We pre-suffer everything. We imagine the absolute worst-case scenario for a medical test we haven't even taken yet. We mourn the end of a relationship that is currently perfectly healthy, simply because we are terrified it might end someday.
We voluntarily inject the pain of a hypothetical future into a perfectly peaceful present.
Seneca points out the sheer absurdity of this behavior. He asks us to imagine a man who is told he will be tortured 50 years from now.
Right. That man wouldn't be disturbed by the news unless he actively chose to leap over all those intervening years and project his mind into the distant trouble.
Yet we do this cognitive time travel daily. We leap into hypothetical disasters.
Seneca reminds us of a fundamental law of physics and time. Both the past and the future are absent. You cannot touch them. You cannot act within them. You can only act and feel in the present moment.
He writes, "What is greater madness than to be tortured by the future and not to save your strength for the actual suffering?"
If the tragedy does eventually happen, you are going to need all your energy to deal with it then. Why are you draining your batteries today?
By pre-suffering, we ruin the peace we actually possess. We take the one thing we actually own, the present moment, and we corrupt it with ghosts.
It's just so true.
So, as you close out this deep dive and return to the reality of your day, notice the mechanics of your own mind. Pay attention to the exact moment you begin to pre-suffer.
Notice when your mind starts shivering before the fever.
Exactly. When you are dreading an upcoming meeting or playing out a catastrophic argument in your head while you're taking a shower, catch yourself in the act of cognitive time travel. When you feel that anticipatory dread spiking your heart rate, gently but firmly, pull your mind back to the physical reality of the present moment.
Return to the straight line of virtue right here, right now.
Because this exact moment is the only place you actually have any power.
Consider how often we allow things we do not possess the future, the hypothetical opinions of others, the shifting circumstances we can't control, to dictate the happiness of the things we actually do possess.
We let the fear of losing our wealth ruin the enjoyment of the wealth we have today.
We let the fear of death corrupt the vivid life we are living right now. If your virtue, your own reasoning mind, is the only real possession that cannot be taken by storm, then you are already fully equipped to face whatever tomorrow brings. The divine seeds are already planted within you.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.